This is Gemma Ahearne, lecturer in Criminology, and you are listening to the Academy's Developing Practice podcast.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Academy's Developing Practice podcast. In this episode, we chat with Gemma about her recent Learning and Teaching Fellowship awarded for her innovative micro-learning approach to teaching. We hope you enjoy.
Gemma, we're really pleased to be talking with you today about your recent Learning and Teaching Fellowship awarded for your innovative use of a micro-learning approach to teaching. And as you've been on the podcast before, could you just give us a quick reminder of your background and how you arrived at the position that you're in today at the University of Liverpool?
Yeah, thank you for having me on, Matt and Alex. I've been teaching in higher education for 10 years in September, and I have had a non-traditional route into academia. I previously dropped out of University of Liverpool as an undergraduate, and I returned to university at 25 as a mature student. I've worked in a range of industries, including retail, the hair and beauty industry, the nighttime economy, in addition to charity roles as well in the third sector. I'm committed to widening participation and showing the value of lived experience and hopefully being a little bit of a rebel.
Oh, I like that. So tell me more. What does that? You're committed to being a rebel. How have you been a rebel?
I think, and I'll probably repeat a little bit of this later as well when you ask me for kind of my tips to take away. I just think that no change happens without being a little bit rebellious. And I just think if we don't push the envelope a little bit and be a little bit provocative and maybe a little bit contentious in a good way that just makes other people reflect on what we're doing and why we're doing it that way, then change never happens, because people will always say, oh, we can't do that because we've always done it this way. And they won't have, a pedagogical reason for that or a defence. It will just be people like to do what they've always done. And I think now we're in this recovery period of the pandemic and the world is still topsy-turvy. I think that this is the time to be rebellious and things to not go back as they were before.
Yeah, I agree with that. You're very much talking the language of a true Scouser there, aren't you, with rebelliousness. I love it. I miss that.
Brilliant. I love also, Gemma, that you've kind of followed a non-traditional route into academia. I wondered if you could just reflect on us in terms of, dropping out of your undergraduate studies and then the route that you've taken back into academia. Do you think, have you reflected on that? I think, often the world would see someone dropping out of undergraduate studies maybe as a failure, but actually I'm guessing that that's really informed the way you practice now. Do you think actually that's been a massive win for you?
Absolutely, and I've only really started to reflect on that recently, to be honest, because of putting forward for my L&T fellowship that I was awarded, and then advanced HE, and I'm putting all these documents together and really having to reflect on my practice. And I think feedback from students as well. When students think themselves, they might have to defer a year or they might actually leave, and they don't make that decision lightly. That it's a lot of soul searching, and they might just decide it's not for them, or higher education isn't for them right now, perhaps because of health or caring responsibilities or whatever it might be. And I tell them it's not a failure. It's not for you right now. You're taking a different path. That path's going to get you a lot of different lived experience and transferable skills. And then if you do come back to study, if you decide to, it's going to put you in a stronger position. So I do think it actually puts me in a stronger position because I've had a lot of exposure to different industries, different working environments, different kinds of people. I've had to learn to communicate in different ways and to, broad range of audiences. And I think it makes me very grateful as well for the position that I'm in now, because I do think this is a privileged job to be in. I love teaching and I love getting to do it in higher education. And higher education for me at 18, 19, it wasn't for me. And that's okay, but at the time I was pushed, like, you have to go to uni and you have to do this. And, I probably should just not have come at that time. But it's interesting as well. So I'm really interested in widening participation and like community and belonging. And one of the things I have reflected on is, I'm a bit of a boring small town girl from Birkenhead, and I like knowing everyone, and I knew everyone in school and sixth form and college. And coming to the University of Liverpool was a bit of a culture shock for me. Being with like 300 other students in some lectures, I found that really overwhelming. So I think one of the things that we need to do as well is think about how overwhelming that might be for a range of other learners as well, and that culture shock that we suddenly expose them to, and ways that we can better remedy that. So they're things that I'm thinking about at the moment as well.
Yeah, that's definitely something I've been thinking about recently in terms of learning to fail, and actually seeing that as a real positive and a real opportunity to develop and change and learn in terms of the future. So it's great to hear your story. Now, you were awarded a Learning and Teaching Fellowship at the university for your integration of the micro-learning approach to the module that you lead. And we have chatted to you about this on a podcast before, but it's great that you've had a Learning and Teaching Fellowship awarded in recognition of that work. So can you really briefly tell us a little bit about that model, building on the podcast that you've recorded before?
Yeah, thank you. So when I developed my non-linear micro-learning pedagogy, it was during the pandemic. We were all locked away, all locked down. And it was me recognising, and I've reflected on this in the journal article that I wrote as well for the Develop an Academic Practice journal, that students might face a range of digital inequalities. They might be at home and everyone was trying to use the internet at the same time for work. They might have been in shared student accommodation and therefore the Wi-Fi quality was poor. They might not have had access to their own computer or laptop. They might have been working, chronic illness, caring, and so on. So with EDI really as my default position and at the core of what I was doing, the non-linear micro-learning pedagogy gives students control over the pace and direction of their learning. And I know I use this little analogy all the time, but it does help to imagine a board game and students moving around as pieces of that board game at different speeds, different directions, maybe sometimes colliding. That's how I like to get people to imagine it, because I didn't think this was like a radical thing when I designed it. But apparently, a lot of people are saying the non-linear element is, and a lot of people maybe struggle to get their head around what I'm saying or how it might be transferable to their discipline. And this pedagogy is perfect as well for building belonging and community as students support each other. This is really about active learning and peer-based learning. And that's something I rely heavily on as well on my alternative dissertation module, Creative Consultants Dissertation by Portfolio, where students learn not only in research clusters, but break down into smaller pods as well. And they then help each other. So I think that's probably a summary I'd give for that.
So just so I've got this right in my own head, it's non-linear micro-learning pedagogy is what we're talking about. So
yeah.
Did you come up with this on your own? Have you taken examples from other colleagues in the sector? How did you arrive at that position?
So I arrived at it by myself. But then once I designed it and then realised maybe some people might think it was a bit out there, I then looked into a lot of literature, a lot of pedagogical literature that would support what I was doing. There was a lot out there on the micro-learning because, of course, we all had to do that to cope with lockdown and being pushed online all of a sudden. But non-linear is because I'm dyslexic. I learn in a non-linear way. And so the idea for most of the modules that I lead, and I lead 5 modules at the moment, although it'll be a little bit less next year, is that for the first 2 weeks of my modules, that's normally, the introduction, the overview, the core theory that you need. And then each other week is a case study. So if some students do want to move in a linear, normal, chronological fashion, and that's how they like to learn, that's fine, they can do that. And of course, the seminars will go in that order. But if students, like a particular case study, they're interested in that, they can jump in at that bit of the module, because everything is preloaded to the virtual learning environment canvas at the start of the semester. So they can go through that at their own pace, and they can then bring those examples to whichever seminar they want. So, for example, on my sex work module, crime, justice and the sex industry, a lot of students find themselves interested in the policing of the sex industry, or trafficking, or the global sex worker rights movement. So they might jump in at like week 10 or week 11 or week 12, and they might want to bring that when we're talking about stigma and violence, and they might want to really bring in some of those global examples. So we're not just talking about it in a UK context. And that then inspires other students on the module to read what their peers are telling them has been so beneficial for them. In a way that's much more effective than if I'm just telling everyone, read this, watch this. Students do tend to react, I think, a lot better if their peers are telling them how beneficial something has been and recommending something. So yeah, that's what I've done. I hope that helps explain it a little bit more.
It really does. It really does. I think what's really great about it from like my point of view is that the options are there. So if somebody likes that sort of methodical, okay, stage 1, 2, 3, and you can go through it in the order which, has been loosely designed, but for the others, they can just pick and choose bits, get really deep into one bit, and then use that reference to go back when their peers are doing something on, let's say, stage 3 or something like that. I'm calling it stages. I know it's not stages, but I really, really like the fact that it's so flexible in that approach. I think that's brilliant. You sort of touched on it earlier when you were talking about lockdown and things. Was EDI the sort of driving force behind the need for that type of development, or was there a few things at play?
I think EDI for me, it really was at the core, because I was aware of the digital inequalities. I was aware that some people, due to neurodiversity, would find learning online difficult, or more difficult than they would face-to-face. Likewise, some people would prefer it because they might be suffering from anxiety, mental health issues. That meant they preferred the online learning environment. So I had to make it work for everybody, but also let everybody know that, I was trying to be inclusive for everyone. And that really showed in the reaction from the students, and also in our student evaluations, which were excellent. But so many students, I think for the module, there was about 26 qualitative freehand comments left, and they were all positive, which was amazing. But many of them picked up on the fact how reassured they felt that everything had been preloaded, and how reassured they felt that because of the non-linear nature of this design, that they could ask questions at any time, that all the essay questions are released at the start of the module. So if they'd chosen to do the essay topic that related to week 11, let's say, they didn't have to wait till week 11 to have that lecture and seminar and get that information. So they could constantly get this cycle of feedback of their ideas. And that's something I really encourage students to do from week 1. Bring all your ideas, even on assessments at that stage. I'm not expecting them to have any idea at that stage, but anything they're thinking of to do with potentially the assessment questions they might answer, start bringing the ideas literally from the first week. Because what that does as well is it builds their confidence in approaching academics. And it then means that they use our office hours, our student support hours, and they are getting constant feedback from me and from other learners on their ideas, what else to add, what else to read. So yeah, EDI was definitely a core concern, particularly during that first lockdown when we really didn't know what was going to happen at all. It helped give students a sense of control and a sense of, some things being in their control when everything else seems so topsy-turvy.
I can absolutely see how this works for a whole range of learners on your module, Gemma. And you've talked about the overwhelming response that you've had through the students' surveys. And I know you've been nominated for an Innovative Lecturer of the Year award as well in response to this. I'm just wondering about the kind of lecturers' experience. I guess lecturers, if they're going to adopt this style, they need to relinquish some of the control over their module. Historically, when I was teaching, I was very much in control in terms of the content that I shared with my students, the journey that they would take through the module, when I would introduce new elements. And you've relinquished a lot of that for the sake of the whole diverse range of students on your module. So I just wondered if you could reflect a little bit in terms of the kind of lecturer experience.
I think in terms of being a lecturer, the students have taught me so much through this process. Also with my other third year module, the one I mentioned just earlier, the alternative dissertation module, where the students are in research clusters and there's group supervision, not the one-on-one supervision you would get with a traditional dissertation module. And through that, the students have introduced all kinds of things themselves that I've then adapted to. So, for example, keeping live Google Docs of their meetings. So instead of me giving each student individually feedback on notes, which obviously normally I would never be able to do, workload would never allow for that, I can then look on their Google Doc that they're all sharing together with their notes and readings and recommendations. I can see what everyone is putting on there, and I can leave live comments for everyone else to look at. And the students are learning in different time zones, some of them, because some people went back home or went to care for families overseas during the pandemic. And people are working around paid employment and different things. So people are doing it at different times. But often, and I've talked about this on Twitter as well, and it's got quite a lot of interest recently. Often students are keeping these Google Docs in live time. So in seminars, instead of just making their own notes on their own laptop or their own pen and paper, they're all sharing their notes on a big group Google Doc that I can then, the reason that I can then have a look at that is obviously if students were sharing misinformation or if someone had got the wrong point and then everybody took on board what they said, that would be no good. But I can then check that they're on the right lines, that they have picked up the right thing from the lecture and from the seminar. And I can add in extra things, well, yes, but have you also thought about this? I can play devil's advocate. Yes, but, how do we respond to this particular policy document in light to that theory or whatever? But it's this constant ongoing feedback loop. And it helps me as well, because I can very clearly see then if people haven't understood something quite right or whether they do need extra support in an area. And it's just great for me as well, because as a lecturer, I love my research area, and I'm quite sad. My 2 third year modules are like my babies. I do love them, and for me to be able to see how seriously students are taking their studies and how they're helping other people as well, how they've been making reasonable adjustments for the students in terms of making voice recordings for some students who are dyslexic, asking what kind of font they should be using, all these different things. It really has taught me a lot. I think when I've spoken to some lecturers about microlearning and this non-linear way of doing things and preloading all the material from the start, often they're concerned about time constraints and workload. And this helps my workload. I haven't got time in semester to be recording or making material in semester. So it is top heavy, it is front loaded. I know I've said this before, but once it's all up there, you're good to go. And you get a lot less emails from students maybe panicking about where material is, why it hasn't been uploaded yet, because it's all there for them to use at their leisure. So it takes away a lot of pressure once semester begins. So hopefully that helps answer your question.
I think it definitely does. Are there any pitfalls to this? I mean, you've relinquished control, but the students have got access to all the material, up front. I guess the only pitfall is probably what you've just mentioned, isn't it? About it being top heavy in terms of workload. Are there any other sort of disadvantages to using a non-linear approach? Let me just add on to that. I was just thinking, so you're using Canvas and you might have that sort of adaptive release where you've got content built up at the background and you're having Canvas release it for you on a timed basis, that drip feed approach. Would you ever go back to that, do you think? And are there any pitfalls that you can think of?
I personally would never go back to that. I do have colleagues that work in other disciplines where perhaps it might be dangerous, like physically, if you're working in chemistry or something, or, you might need people to know certain things at a certain point before they just go and try and do something themselves. And that's just probably me reflecting on myself in school with science. And, that might be dangerous. But I still think this is transferable to most disciplines as long as there's ground rules and as long as students know that they have to ask their lecturer, or if it's a dissertation module, their supervisor, before they do certain things. So on my alternative dissertation module, it wouldn't, they're doing literature-based topics, but from September, we're working inter-faculty with engineering students and medicine students. So obviously the students would know it's not appropriate to go and, do things that you haven't been given permission to do. That's why you've got a supervisor. So you can look at material at any stage and talk amongst yourselves, but it wouldn't be appropriate to just start setting up, meetings with people when you haven't had approval to do that. Yeah. But I think building that rapport and having so I always set ground rules in week 1 that we all sign up to, what students can expect from me and what I can expect from them. So they're the only kind of pitfalls that I can imagine, or perhaps if someone is overwhelmed by how much content there is, if they're looking at it all at once, and just reassuring those students that they can just go through it methodologically, chronologically, and that is okay. They will not be at a disadvantage. Yeah, no, absolutely. They can chunk it up themselves, can't they? They don't have to be overwhelmed with the whole. I think I really like the approach. So that approach that you've developed has led you to apply and successfully achieve the University Learning and Teaching Fellowship for 21-22, where you were awarded £1,000. So can you tell us how you've used the fellowship to further develop your learning and teaching practice? So far, I've spent some of the money on a research day for my creative consultant dissertation by portfolio students. Because as part of that module, they produce an 8,000 to 10,000 word portfolio instead of a traditional diss. And they also present their findings in a creative way. And that can be live on the day, or that can be through a pre-recorded podcast, short video, digital storytelling, a poster. However, whichever creative mode they choose. And on that day, we ordered in catering, we had external guests, and then each student is provided with feedback from all of their peers, all of the academic staff and professional services staff on the module, and the external guests as well. And one of our external guests from Teach First gave us a quote afterwards to use, because he was so impressed by what he'd seen from the students and the level to which they were presenting and the findings they'd come up with. And he said it was the best thing he's seen in the 4 years of his current role. So I've used some of the funds so far for that. And I'd like to host another event as well for the SOCI 347 students in September. And that's going to be a joint event with the engineering students from MEC 327 and their Dr. Matt Murphy students.
There's so much within this, Gemma, that is brilliant in terms of really enhancing the student experience. And it seems to me that this approach could easily be transferred to other disciplines. You talked there about your work with engineering. Can you tell us about any of your other plans that you've got to share your practice?
Yeah, so I'm working with colleagues nationally. We're writing journal articles together at the moment. I've just been commissioned for a piece for The Conversation. I want to write more for Times Higher Education. I would like to do more podcasts. And I'm also talking with a colleague at Cardiff University at the moment in the law school there about making a learning and belonging mentoring scheme for colleagues nationally around the country who might want to do different things, alternative things, and they're just maybe worried or just want advice really on how to influence others, how to get buy-in for maybe doing things that other colleagues might be a little bit hesitant about or a little bit worried about. So how we can build that influence and build that momentum so that we're all sharing this kind of practice very freely and building on the excellent pedagogical approaches that colleagues have got around the country.
So Gemma, this podcast, as you know, as you've been on it before, is the Developing Practice podcast. And we like to finish each episode with 3 or 4 take-home tips that the listener can reflect on in terms of their own personal practice. So if you can give us a few tips in relation to your practice, what would they be?
Thanks, Matt. So I think be a rebel. Rules are there to be broken to some degree, or at least pushed a little bit. Be brave, because pushing change will get resistance. Do it anyway. Listen more than you speak. And that can be difficult sometimes. We all want to jump in, interject, but listen more than you speak. And also find supportive colleagues who share your vision for change, or at the very least, tolerate it.
Brilliant. I love that. They're short and sweet, but I love them. Be a rebel, bravery, listen more than you speak. That's definitely something we can take home and reflect on.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gemma.
Oh, I really enjoyed that conversation with Gemma. It's always really nice to catch up with her and to hear about some of the practice that she's involved with. What I really liked was we discussed right at the beginning of the podcast about using what could be perceived as failures to learn and to inform our future practice. And that's something that I've been thinking about. And Gemma's obviously using her experience of initially dropping out of undergraduate study to inform her work now around widening participation and inclusion.
Yeah, definitely. I think something we can really take away there, isn't there, about learning from perceived failures. I really liked her model for non-linear microlearning, as it has a whole range of options for students to navigate their learning. And it's just really, really flexible to suit all. So some students will want to progress through the module in a systematic way, whereas others will engage in a different way depending on their learning needs and preferences, which I think was just brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely a new way of thinking about learning, particularly on the modules that she's been leading. If you'd like to take your thinking further about this key concept, we've added some further resources to the website on a specific podcast reading list, which you can access at liverpool.ac.uk/the-academy/podcast. And also, we'd love to hear what you thought about the episode. So please do tweet us at Live Uni Academy. And you can also find us at eLearnerMatt or at Alexandra_Owen on Twitter.
Yeah, I'm really grateful for those who have already taken the time to either rate or review our show in your podcast provider's app. But if you haven't done so already, please do review the show, as it really will help others find us. Bye for now.